Hi, everybody. I am here with EJ, and we are recording episode 5 of For the Love of Language, our little podcast that we're doing here. EJ, how you doing this morning?
Doing good. I'm super excited to be back here.
I'm super excited to have you. It's so great. And I'm glad that we can stream this on Twitch again.
Definitely, yeah.
So we are here, episode 5, and today we're going to talk about the hardest language. Isn't that right?
It is. And I'm super excited because this is a topic that has come up so many times for me in life. Like, having lived in a lot of different places and learned a lot of languages, I can't even count the times that I've had people ask me, isn't that the hardest language in the world?
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that we're going to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, go ahead and kick us off.
Yeah, I do want to bring one thing up real quick, and this is partially because Russian as a language is going to come up here, and so I think it's better to just address it head on. So I think everybody knows about the current events happening with Russia being in Ukraine, and obviously that's really, really tragic what's going on there for all of the Ukrainians who are suffering. And then I also have a lot of friends in Russia who are protesting against the war and could face, consequences for that. And I don't want to go into politics too much here, but I do just want to say, obviously that is really tragic. And, when we bring up Russian as a language, like, I do want to, be aware of the struggles that are going around, that are happening there, but also, like, I think it is tragic that Russians are being discriminated against in other countries right now. And if you hear someone speaking Russian, chances are you won't be able to tell the difference between Russian and Ukrainian unless you've actually learned those languages anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But do just, be kind to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as I like to say on my Twitch stream all the time, language is just a tool. And so a lot of people who are using those languages, especially if you're hearing them like outside of like context, remember that it's just a tool. It's not necessarily an act of aggression or anything like that. People are just trying to live their lives and communicate with each other and their loved ones. So yes, be patient and be kind. And thank you for calling that out, EJ.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's dive in to the actual topic then. So I did send out a survey. And the survey was really, really simple. It was just, what is the hardest language and why?
And thank you to everyone who participated in that survey. We really appreciated your feedback.
Definitely. Yeah. And we had some really, really great responses come through that, as well as some just fun responses. There were a couple that I really appreciated. One was the language of love.
Oh,
right. Kind of hard to dispute that one.
Yeah. No, that one's a little tricky. Still learning that one myself.
Right. Another one that I really appreciated that came up a couple of times was Malbolge. And I think this is partly because I know multiple people who are software engineers, because that's what I do.
Oh.
But it is a language, a programming language that is designed to just be impossible to use. So I thought that was a pretty funny answer as well.
Yeah, at one point we will have to talk about programming languages versus natural languages, because those have definitely come up on my Twitch stream, and they're a very common topic these days, especially with people on the internet.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a very, very interesting topic, and I'd love to discuss that at some point. But yeah, some of the more serious responses that came up, Chinese was one that came up a lot, and partly because of it being a tonal language as well as the writing system, which I think is really interesting because I think you can separate written language from spoken language. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say that having a complex writing system actually makes the language that people speak more difficult.
Yeah, that is something that that's often confused with languages is, orthography systems, ways of writing things is called orthography. And orthography systems are important to learning a language, but they are not the language themselves. Like the orthography kind of supports like spoken language. It's not like the actual language itself is. So there is a distinction, like you said.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, definitely if you're considering learning Chinese, it will take longer to learn the writing system because there's thousands of different characters. Compared to languages with like phonetic alphabets that might have, something in the 20s to maybe the 60s. I mean, there's a very wide spread of how many letters you might have to represent the sounds in your language, but that's still going to be simpler to learn that system than to learn like Chinese characters. But, something cool about Chinese characters is that those are actually shared between several different Chinese languages. So if you learn characters to learn Mandarin, then, you can also read Cantonese and all of the other Chinese languages, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the same can be said with like a few other different writing systems as well. I think many of the languages in India share a same orthography system, even though there's an inordinate amount of languages like within India and Southeast Asia. A lot of them do share orthography systems. So learning an orthography system is not directly tied to one single language and can be used in different aspects as well. But I definitely understand why orthography is hard for people. Like that's the biggest thing that I struggle with, because I've wanted to like learn other languages, but I always stumble up on the orthography.
Yeah, definitely. But if you take away the orthography part, then there's actually a lot of aspects of Mandarin that are relatively simple. Like grammatically, they don't conjugate verbs the way that we do in English or Spanish or Russian. Like the grammar in some ways is simpler than lots of other languages.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, in Mandarin, you understand the context of, you understand the verb through context. So you don't necessarily conjugate it for past, present, and future. It's all the same verb. You just kind of have to understand the context to see what time you're talking about. And also with pronouns, this is kind of fun for those out there who are interested in pronouns. There is no he or she distinction in pronouns. They're pronounced the same. And you have to just understand through context, who it is you're talking about and, kind of infer their gender through context. So that's kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, definitely. And Chinese is not the only language to do that. Like Finnish as well doesn't differentiate between he and she. So that's also pretty cool. But yeah, the other aspect of Chinese that was highlighted as being difficult is the tones, which I think is, really interesting because if you're talking about Mandarin, there's like 4 tones plus a neutral tone. But then if you're talking about Cantonese, then there's actually even more tones than that. And there's, Native American languages that have tones. There's lots of different languages that have tones.
Yeah, I would actually say that a majority of the world's languages have tonal systems in them. So to kind of give everyone a little typological overview, like you said, Native American languages can be tonal. East Asian languages, definitely tonal. Most of Africa has tonal languages. Now, they only have 2 tones, usually a high tone and a low tone, but they are like significant. So that's a good chunk of the world right there that uses tonal languages.
Definitely. And I think, what really comes from this is that it's not that tones are inherently more difficult than not tones. Because like in English, we don't technically use tones, but we do use inflection, which is basically if you ask a question, the tone on that part of the sentence will rise.
Yes.
So we do in some ways use tone, but it's not tone because it's not part of the meaning of a word. Yes. It's part of a sentence.
Yes. In proper linguistics terms, we call this lexical tone. So you would say that in Bantu languages and in varieties of Chinese and Cantonese, they have lexical tone. So tone is like used to differentiate words from one another. Whereas in languages like English and other European languages, we use tone in like a prosodic way. So to indicate bigger chunks of meaning, like questions or statements or emotions and things like that. So we do use tone. We're just not as aware of it because it's not directly related to our lexicon.
Right. Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting. I'll call out a couple other of the examples that came up in the survey. Another response was that Korean is the hardest because the sentence structure there is subject, object, verb.
Oh, okay.
English, we use subject, verb, object. So that's switched. But there's no inherent reason why a language has to be structured with that syntax.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good point. So there are a lot of different ways to structure a sentence. And so you have subject, verb, object, object, verb, subject. There's a bunch of different combinations, some that you just don't find. And I can't remember those right off the top of my head, to be honest. But having verb final languages can be really tricky for some people. But again, verb final languages are very common. So that's a common thing in Korea. It's also a common thing in, again, Indian languages. Those are usually verb final. And so we're using like typology to say that things, aren't as difficult. And it does take some getting used to, but like it just takes some getting used to. It's just a different structure, but it is possible. And when you think about it, English doesn't always stick to its own structure either. So we usually do subject, verb, object, right? But there are some instances where the object comes first. If you think about like passivization and stuff, you can say the lamp broke, or the lamp was broken, right? The lamp is still the object of the sentence, but it's coming before the verb. In that case, the verb is final. So
in that instance, if you say the lamp broke, the lamp is technically the subject of the sentence, but the semantic whole is what's different.
Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, there are some instances where English ends verb finally. So there are exceptions to all of these rules, and so sentence structure is a little bit more flexible than you think.
Definitely. And I want to call out as well, like there's also languages where the order of the words don't matter as much. Like languages will usually have a tendency to follow a syntactic order. But if you take Russian, for example, you can say, I love you in Russian, я люблю тебя. You can also say, you love, я тебя люблю. And part of the choice of what order to put the words in Russian is what you want to emphasize. So if you want to emphasize something, you actually put it at the end of a sentence. And the reason that works is because of the way that Russian declines nouns. The meaning of what is the subject and what is the object is actually included in the word itself. And so the order can be changed.
Yeah. And there are a number of languages like that. We call them free word order languages. And you find those a lot of places because, again, the word itself can tell you the meaning and can tell you exactly how it's related in the syntax. So there are, like we've talked about before, languages always have a way of encoding things. For some, it's through context, through some, it's through word order, through some, it's like in the word. And so it just kind of depends on how they've decided to encode that information.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there were really just a couple other responses to this, like Japanese and Russian because of the grammar, Finnish also because of the way that the words change. And Finnish is interesting because, like, a lot of the time where we would have separate words in English, Finnish is an agglutinative language, which means that they just take morphemes that have meaning and keep combining them into a single word. So you'll have words in Finnish that are extremely long, but they don't have, like, for an example, the word in is not a separate word, a preposition the way that it is in English. If I wanted to say in Finland, in Finnish, Finland is Suomi. In Finland is a single word, Suomessa. And so you add that sa to the end of the word, and you've added in that meaning. And I think, from all of these responses, what really comes out is that what makes a language difficult for people to learn is just how it differs from their native language. And if you have these structures that you're just not accustomed to, you do have to change the way that you think to accommodate that. But from like an objective standpoint, children who are learning their native language don't learn Chinese. Like a Chinese child doesn't learn Chinese slower than a Spanish speaking child learns Spanish. Like objectively, the difficulties are pretty much the same, but it's when you look at them subjectively, coming from a specific language, coming from the way that you already know you want to phrase something, that it can be difficult to reframe things for yourself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely super relative to whatever language you were raised with as a kid. Whatever is normal for you, whatever is different from that normal, and how different from that normal, that's going to be determining like the hardest language, and that's going to differ from person to person as well, because we all have our own different brains, and our brains kind of see different patterns. So for some people, they might have an issue with like the phonology of a language. They're like, I can't wrap my mouth around these sounds. I can't hear the distinction. For others, it's the structure of the language. They're like, I can't get the word order right. So again, a lot of it is relative to your native language, and a lot of it is personal too.
Yeah, definitely. And like, if you're coming from a specific language, then you can see examples of like language learning programs that do try to rate language by difficulty. I think probably a well-known one is the Defense Language Institute in the US that teaches like a bunch of different languages, and they put them in categories where like Spanish, it takes 36 weeks in their course, and different versions of Arabic take 64 weeks because they've decided that's how long it should take to learn that language for an English speaker, which I think is really interesting. Like, do you think that those kind of gradations of difficulty are justified?
In certain contexts, for sure. So if we're talking like the military or something, they need to be able to like understand, they need to be able to track how long it's going to take for people to learn the language. So in some instances, like that does matter, because it needs, like, if you're going to get people to learn a language, you have to at a certain timeline, then that's important. And so, in certain contexts, it does make sense. I don't think it applies just like broadly, right? Like if you're on a deadline to learn a language, of course, it's going to take longer to learn some than others. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's inherently harder. That just means it's going to take longer for you to acquire the patterns. So yeah, they're justified. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean, just because you're using something for like an institutional sake, doesn't necessarily mean that it has like actual repercussions, or it has like value outside of that one specific context,
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think with the Foreign Language Institute, they have a lot of experience teaching these languages, and they do know how long it generally takes for people to hit the level of proficiency that they want. I do think, one of the things that kind of stands out to me from that is like, there's always going to be outliers. Like, there's always going to be individuals who could learn a given language much faster just because they're able to adapt to a different way of thinking faster than other people. The example of Finnish that came up in the language survey is actually really interesting to me. I want to touch back on that for a moment, because I did live in Finland in 5th and 6th grade. I think it was quite a while ago. But because I lived there, I did have Finnish language classes. And I would say that for me, it was more difficult to learn Finnish than any of the other languages I've studied, but not for the reasons that you would think. Like, it wasn't because Finnish as a language is inherently harder than any other language. It was because every Finn speaks English and is more than happy to speak English with you.
Right.
And so there weren't opportunities to practice Finnish. And then
Right.
also, like, even the Finnish teachers thought that Finnish is an extremely difficult language to learn. And so if your
Mm,
teachers don't believe that you can actually learn it and become fluent, and if no one's willing to practice it with you, that for me was what made Finnish more difficult than any other language. And
yeah.
I love Finland, like the people there are amazing, but just because all of them did speak English and were very happy to use it, there weren't opportunities to speak Finnish.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lot of bias that plays into it too. Like if you approach a language with the mindset of this is gonna be difficult, of course it's gonna be like harder for you because you're coming in with that mindset with predisposed to being to like making it more difficult for yourself. Having the right mindset when approaching a language is half the battle. You'd be surprised if you approach it and being like, this is going to be easy. Like, I mean, it's not going to be super easy. Like, there's not going to be a massive change, but like, having a sense of optimism is definitely going to help you out.
Definitely. Yeah. And like, no matter what language you're learning, you can learn how to say, hi, what's your name? Where are you from? Like, you can learn those basic things within
Yeah.
an hour, right? And, maybe that's just because you're using rote memorization instead of figuring out the patterns and how to extrapolate that to other things. But I think a huge part of what makes languages easier to learn versus more difficult to learn is that mindset and being willing to try to express things and being willing to mess up and maybe look like an idiot every now and then. But it's by trying and actually communicating that you get that proficiency.
Absolutely. Everything takes practice. Everything does. And like we've said, language is a tool and it's a skill, just like, learning the piano or playing soccer. And so it's definitely something that takes a bit of time. And when you put in that time, it's worth it.
Right. So I think maybe a logical follow on question from this is like, if you are coming from a specific language and you can say, like, oh, I want to learn a foreign language, and I know that, this language's writing system is really difficult. I know that this language's grammar is very different from the language that I'm coming from. Should you factor in your preconceived notions of a language's difficulty into your decision of whether or not to learn a language?
I mean, it's definitely one way to do it. I mean, ultimately, your desire to learn the language should overrule everything. So, whether you think it's difficult or hard, like, sure. I mean, it's a personal choice at that point.
Right, it is. And like I think that goes back deeper into like what are the motivations for people to learn a language in the first place, and is difficulty one of the primary factors? Like I think in the US, if you are required to take a language course, a lot of people will go for what they perceive to be the easiest option just to like get those credits, pass those requirements, be able to graduate high school or college and move on and maybe not ever use it again, which in some ways is kind of tragic because you're putting hours into something and just to like make the grade or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of people are also really interested in being able to connect with other people, being able to form relationships. Like a lot of people might choose Spanish in the US because there's a lot of Spanish speakers here.
Yeah. And you can also get like a lot of practice. Like choosing a hard language or a rare language is all well and good, but it's going to be more difficult to learn because you have less access to practice. So that kind of plays into it too, is like, well, Spanish is a pretty easy one to acquire here in the States because there are plenty of Spanish speakers who would be willing to speak Spanish with you. But if you're trying to learn a Bantu language from South Africa, it's going to be a little bit harder to find people to practice with. And so it'll be a little bit harder for you to learn as well.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, that is probably a really, really big point and maybe kind of sums up a lot of what we talked about. Like there are languages that might be harder based on the language that you're coming from, but it's also going to be a lot harder because of social reasons if you have a language that you're not able to practice.
Yeah.
So there's, I think, a lot of things to take into consideration. And I think a lot of times people will say one language is the hardest language because of one thing that's particularly difficult for them.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you look at all of the aspects of a language, like fundamentally, languages exist to describe the real world. And the real world is not that different if you're talking about it in English versus if you're talking about it in Chinese. Like, yes, the architecture of buildings and the culture, like there are differences between those places. But fundamentally, what we're describing is the real world. And I think linguistic complexity arises from the complexities in the real world, which is why it doesn't take native speakers of any language more time to learn their native language than native speakers of another language, because the complexities of the system are reflective of the complexities of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And we kind of talked about this a little bit in some of our previous episodes, but there's always a way to talk about something. There's always a way to find and express whatever it is you need to express in any language. There's nothing that is like non-translatable or anything, right? There's always going to be a way to get what you need across. And sometimes it just takes a little patience and creativity.
Yeah. And if there's one thing that's really complex in one language, like if you find tones difficult in Chinese, then there's other parts of it that are really easy because those tones are just one way to, reflect the differences between words. It's a tone is similar to a phoneme, right? It doesn't exist in isolation. Like it is always attached to a vowel. And so it's not necessarily a phoneme in and of itself, but it is a sound that dictates the meaning of a word. And in every language, there's going to be, maybe not finite because languages are always growing and expanding and new concepts are always being developed. But there's a limited number of words that you actually need in order to operate and be successful in a language. And I don't think that's drastically different from any one language to another.
Yeah.
And whereas in English, we have a lot of separate tiny words. Like I gave the example of in, the preposition being a word in English, and in Finnish, it's a suffix, it's a morpheme, it's part of a word. And those are just different ways of expressing the same thing. Like that complexity, being able to express that something is inside of something, exists in every language. It's just a choice of how they do it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, 100%. I don't know what else to add on to that. It's true. There's just the complexity will always be there. It'll just manifest itself in different ways.
Definitely. Cool. Yeah, I don't know that I have anything else to add to that either. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. Hopefully our viewers and listeners gained something from that. If you do have any questions or comments, we would definitely love to hear them on our Instagram, For the Love of Language. So do feel free to connect with us there and we can have discussion.
People who are on Twitch, you're also welcome to join my Discord, and I have a special section there about linguistics and language where I can address things personally, and we can bring topics up. If you have ideas for future podcasts, you're more than welcome to shoot them there as well. We try to record every Saturday, so that's just giving you a heads up. And we try to post new episodes weekly. So we're so glad to have all of you here. Thank you so much, EJ, for joining us here on Twitch anyway. And thank you everyone else. So yeah, long story short, the hardest language, it's relative.
Definitely. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day today.